May this reading simultaneously relax you and awaken you. Okay, everybody lock in. Lessons of a Tibetan Pilgrimage. This is chapter 30. In June 1998, we were in Kathmandu, heading to the sacred Mount Kailash, a 22,000-foot peak towering above the high Tibetan plateau. Mount Kailash is said to be the home of Lord Shiva and his divine consort Parvati. Circumambulating the mountain by foot, a treacherous 32-mile journey usually takes 3 days, but we did it in 2. It's a pilgrimage that adherents of Hindu, Buddhist, and Bon Po traditions believe absolves the participant of lifetimes of karma. Fun fact, nobody has ever successfully climbed Mount Kailash, and traditionally it's said the reason this is so is because only Shiva can reach the top. Now, more than 20 years later, the Chinese government has developed the route to Mount Kailash and the sacred lake Manasoravar, Manasoravar, a crystal clear freshwater lake at 15,000-foot elevation that is believed to have flowed from Lord Brahma's mind, the creator. There are asphalt roads nicer than in America, marked by drainage every 100 yards or so. Proper bridges now span the rushing rivers, tributaries of the Brahmaputra and the Ganga, and gas stations, restaurants, and hotels have sprung up from soil more friendly to tourism than agriculture. But in 1998, when we were there were no bridges or roads, or places to buy gasoline or bottled water. We arrived at Lake Mansarovar from Nepal in a caravan of Range Rovers, plowing across the barren, roadless road. I was lucky to enter Kathmandu at all, as my passport and I had arrived separately. In order to travel to Mount Kailash and Lake Mansarovar, one had to be part of a tour group and obtain a group visa to Tibet. Mainland China visas are not sufficient for travel in Tibet, nor could individuals receive a Tibet visa. Nepal-based travel companies that specialize in group tours process all passports together for the Tibetan permits. Indians don't require visas or passports to enter Nepal. A driver's license or other photo ID is sufficient. Hence, our tour organizers, to save time, sent everyone's passports in advance to Kathmandu, so our Chinese and Tibetan visas could be processed and ready by the time we arrived. They overlooked the fact that there was an American citizen ostensibly subject to different rules and regulations than the 200 Indians I was traveling with. On the day we departed, I asked the organizer for my passport. "You'll get it tomorrow at the hotel," he said. "How am I supposed to travel without it?" I asked. His face fell. "Oh no," he exclaimed. "We forgot. You are American and need your passport to enter Nepal. We'll think of something." That something was to have me go through the Nepali immigration queue in a thickly packed group of Indians who merely waved driver's license and voter IDs in the faces of disinterested immigration officials. Whether 100 IDs were shown for 100 people or not, no one noticed. A group passed through. Some IDs were held in the air. No one even looked at me. The thrill of committing an international felony, surrounded and protected by my new family, was exhilarating. Oh, I love this. We're going to go on a pilgrimage to Tibet with our dear author, to Mount Kailash. This is like a school trip with our Sangha. 2 days later, we left Kathmandu at sunrise, led by 3 masters. My guru, Pujya Swamiji, another Pujya Swamiji, Guru Sharandanand Ji Maharaj, a revered and renowned saint from Mathura, the birthplace of Lord Krishna, and Pujya Sant Shri Ramesh Bhai Oza, also known as Pujya Bhaishuri, a world-famous Kathakar, one who delivers over a period of 7 or 9 days a devotional rendition of the holy epics of Hinduism, the Srimad Bhagavatam, the Mahabharata, or the Ramayana. Can you imagine a story so long it takes 10 days to recite? In their company, we were a village of more than 50 Range Rovers, 4 trucks filled with tents, food and water, and 2 tankers of gasoline, as there would be no place for more than 300 miles to refuel. We traveled through the lush Himalayas to Kathmandu to Nyalam, at the border of Nepal and Tibet. Then from Nyalam to Saga, a Chinese military town where photography of any sort was prohibited. In Nyalam, rows of holes in the ground served as toilets. There were neither walls nor doors separating one from the other. Pujya Swamiji joked about toilet conferencing. In Saga, we slept in the deserted rooms of a military compound on the hard, cold cement floor, fitting together like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle beneath 2 raised cots given to Pujya Swamiji and Pujya Bhaishuri. Icy winds blew in all night through shattered glass windows, and wearing all of the clothes we'd packed, we huddled into our sleeping bags. On our second evening in Saga, I went into the room of Swami Guru Sharananand Ji's Maharaj, with whom I'd fallen completely in love. Maharaji, as everyone calls him, was the mother of my dreams, the one in whose lap you just want to sit forever while he gently strokes your hair. From his eyes flowed a divine motherly love that embraced all his glance fell upon. I tried to position myself in his field of vision as much as I could, and each time our eyes met, I felt I was being reborn, resuckled, and reparented. She's cheating on her guru. Ao beta. Come, child, Maharaji said as I entered. He sat on his cot, propped up with pillows carried from India, with a cup of hot soup in his hands. His disciples had found some cardboard and newspaper to cover the holes in his glass windows, so only sunlight streamed in and onto the long white beard flowing from his chin to the middle of his chest. I sat on the cement floor near the bed and laid my head on his soft blanket. He gently and rhythmically patted the side of my face as though I were an infant he was putting to sleep. After a few minutes he spoke. Beta, he said as I lifted my head, how much soup is too much soup? I wasn't sure if I heard him properly, as I was still swimming in the effects of his touch. Ji Maharaji? Yes, Maharaji, I asked. I said, how much soup is too much soup? I had no answer, and wasn't even sure I had understood the question. There was, of course, no such thing as too much soup. And I hope many of you are filled with soup. Beta, I have had 3 cups of soup. Do you think that is too much, or do you think I might be able to have another cup of soup? Suddenly I realized that in the midst of pouring forth divine love, He was asking me a logistic and pragmatic question to which he actually wanted an answer. Maharaji, I think you can have as much soup as you want, I cooed in response. Truly, what was a bit of extra soup in the presence of an ocean of love? Okay, he said matter-of-factly, then tell him to give me another cup. If, of course, you think it is not too much. It was years before I fully realized the depth of what had happened in that room. It wasn't a Zen-like koan about soup that needed deciphering. Rather, it was a realistic question about the physical body, asked by one who lives not in the body, but in the soul. It was the equivalent of me asking a gas station attendant, is there a difference between the 87, 90, and 92 octane grades? Isn't the 87 just as good and cheaper? Maharaji, in complete identification with the soul, the divine self was actually asking me about the working of this vehicle. How much soup is too much soup? What is the right grade of gas? After 2 days in Saga for high-altitude acclimatization, we departed for Paryang, the last stop before reaching the crystal waters of Lake Mansarovar, nearly 3 miles above sea level. The guest house we stayed in was a series of mud-walled, mud-floored rooms with no doors. The walls and roofs kept out rain and snow, but did little to insulate us from the icy winds that filled our lungs with air, but little oxygen. Breathing, something I had always taken for granted, suddenly became a gift to which I clung on this high-altitude plateau. The dearth of doors brought not only wind, but other guests as well. In the morning, I opened my eyes to a group of Tibetan children standing in our doorway, pushing each other out of the way to squeeze to the front. When I made eye contact with them, they started poking themselves in the middle of their foreheads. What are they doing? I asked the woman lying next to me, whose eyes had also just opened. I have no idea, she said. I wonder what they want. We had heard that the children ask for pens, so we'd brought bags of pens and packs of cookies and other treats. Pen? Pen? I asked and mimed someone writing. They shook their heads feverishly and kept poking themselves in the forehead. Suddenly, one of them leaped through the doorway and onto the sleeping bag of a woman who was applying a bindi with her hand mirror. She had peeled off one of the thin round red circles from a sheet of about 20 and was gingerly sticking it between her eyebrows as the young boy motioned excitingly toward the rest of her pack. She looked up at him, and again he began poking himself between his eyes, and then pointing at the pack of round, red, sticky bindis. Oh, you want a bindi? She asked incredulously, and we all watched in awe. She peeled off another and stretched her hand out to him. He grabbed the bindi from her sticker and immediately stuck it on his forehead. Without the aid of the woman's hand mirror, it wasn't quite in the center, but it seemed he had found it satisfactory. The rest of the kids piled into our makeshift room and traipsing, that's a new word for me too, traipsing, Traipsing, traipsing all over those who are still sleeping, made a beeline for the woman with bindis. Within a few minutes, they all had bright red circles between their eyebrows at the Agnya Chakra, or the third eye center. Hindus apply the tilak or kumkum, vermilion powder, or a bindi sticker as a reminder that we must see using our third eye rather than our 2 physical eyes to see the world. As Pujya Swamiji explains, these 2 eyes are the cause of all our problems. Everything we see makes us angry or jealous or greedy. So we apply tilak to remind ourselves to use the third eye, the inner divine eye, the eye that sees not separation but oneness, not objects but essence. Why these young Tibetans wanted bindis is something I still don't know. It touched me deeply though, because they are not Hindu or Indian and probably don't know anything about the connection of this red sticker to the opening of the third eye. But there are things that transcend religion, that know no borders or boundaries. There are practices that are rooted in a truth beyond teachings. So the truth is apparent even in the absence of the teachings. Tilak and bindis seem to be one of these practices. A beautiful quote, dear Magdalene. I close my eyes so that I can see. I have low blood pressure. It's not dangerously low, but new doctors always check it twice until I assure them, don't worry, it's always low. I suffer no ramifications of this in my life, other than needing to keep my head down a bit longer than most when coming out of the headstands or backbends while doing yoga. If I come back to the upright position too quickly, I get a head rush. My family gets that too. I used to get them a lot, and I'd almost pass out if I even stood up from a chair too quickly. I learned that taking a nice deep breath in before you stand up, and even while standing, seems to alleviate the problem. Maybe that's helpful for you too. Remember to breathe. Dog dang it. The only other occasion that this impacts my life is high altitude trekking. When I trekked in the mountains of the United States or Europe or in Ecuador, I knew that I could go about 12,500 feet before beginning to hallucinate. Oh my goodness. Once, while hiking in the mountains around Baños, a few hours south of Quito, Jim and I had walked a bit higher than that, and the trees started gesticulating to me. The lack of oxygen at high altitude, coupled with already low blood pressure, turns lush mountaintops into my own dizzying little shop of horrors. Wow. Well, if you ever want to trip without any psychoactive substance, just get your blood pressure nice and low and go above 12,500 feet. My lawyer would like to remind you all that that's a joke. I'm just kidding, I don't have a lawyer. Lake Mansarovar sits at more than 15,000 feet. The trek around Mount Kailash begins at Ashtabut, crosses through Dirabuk at around 17,000 feet, and finally crosses the Dolma La Pass at nearly 20,000 feet before descending to Zutulpuk and finally back to Darchain. I had told Pujya Swamiji in advance that I likely would not be able to make it all the way due to the altitude. No problem, he said. We'll send a vehicle back with you, and you can wait in Kathmandu or return to India. Just come for as long as you feel comfortable, and the moment you don't feel well, let me know. That moment never came. Maharaji's question about soup symbolized the distinction between vehicle and driver, between body and soul. These saints live as their souls, not as their bodies. That grace was somehow contagious, and I stayed near enough to them to catch it. On future trips, I learned about Yamsox, a medicine that mitigates the effect of altitude and is recommended by doctors for people going to high altitudes. However, on this journey, I knew nothing about it, only that I was being carried by one for whom altitude is irrelevant. I was blessed to rely not on my own legs and lungs, but on the arms of the divine, in which I rested easily to carry me. Here are some excerpts from the journal I kept on that yatra, on the spiritual pilgrimage. Ooh, I look forward to this. Seems like the next 4 pages or so are dedicated to just her journal entries. First-hand account. I like this. Imagine yourself as our dear author, Sadhvi Bhagawati Saraswati. Previously, American student, married, now Hindu celibate. At an altitude she's never been there before without hallucinating. In the cold winds, on the plateau of the world, the rooftop of our globe, experiencing one of the most holy places with some of the most holy people. Here is her account. In the moment, she writes, "Here on Yatra, looking out over the incredible mountains, stretching out as far as you can see or imagine, reducing you, your van, your entire life into nothing more than a grain of sand, blowing by the side of the road, the mind, eyes, ears, and senses just dissolve into thin air, burning 1 minute and freezing the next. We're on Yatra is the motto, making anything else seem like superfluous gibberish. Even my fears, tears, etc. dissipate into the clouds as they embrace the mountain tops, obscuring from our view the true height of their majesty. The quiet of my tongue, of my mind, the voices around me just swirling above me, to my sides, but unable to penetrate inside to disturb the incredible stillness. We're on Yatra. Yatra to what? From what? Yatra from a life of petty concerns, overestimated needs, empty words, excessive reliance on others, and external focus. Yatra to a mountain that will make us realize the simultaneous nothingness and everythingness of our beings. Nothingness, the futility of our attempts to exercise control and power, for who could so much as leave a lasting footprint on the sands of Shiva's mountain? The superfluity of our endless obtainment of material possessions. Who could carry a mountain to Lord Shiva's feet? We can barely carry our bodies. The irrelevance of the concerns that saturate our daily life. Now it is simply a matter of food, water, sufficient oxygen, and a prayer against rain. Yet, with this ego annihilating nothingness, there is a simultaneous ecstatic realization of our oneness with the sands of which the mountain is made, of our inextricable link to the glorious height of the mountain. Why else would we be so compelled to come, in the face of such hardship, of our brotherhood with the never-washed faces and empty bellies of the people whose lives begin and end in this vast sea of simultaneous emptiness and overflowing abundance? Car rides through roads that aren't. How do they know how to go over so many miles of open space? Do they have a sort of homing instinct, simply driven to Lord Shiva? Finally, after days of endless driving, roads winding on and on, we suddenly came upon a view that can only be the grace of God. The sand and tumbleweed landscape suddenly give way to a lake of majestic proportion, crystal clear, tinged with purple and blue hues as the evening sun casts its last rays upon the waters. The lake seems a mirage, a vast pool of lush beauty in this arid land, a gift sent from heaven as we get closer to the abode of God. We are, at the moment, at the peak of a high hill, almost a gentle cliff of sorts. The lake was a sudden gift as we ascended, as though we were granted a divine vision simultaneously. The sun is setting on the far shore, casting a brilliant halo around the lake as well as filling the lower sky with wisps of gold. We are a fleet of Range Rovers, and suddenly we all stop. No one needed to coordinate it. We silently emerge from the vehicles, pulled by a strength and power in the presence of which we are helpless. Some immediately fall to the ground in pranam. Others simply gaze into the divine sight. I burst into tears, which quickly became sobs, as though wresting parts of my heart from me I didn't even know were there. I wasn't expecting to be affected in this way. A beautiful lake, beautiful mountains, invigorating hiking, the joy of being on Mother Earth's territory. That was my expectation. Yet here I am, brought to my knees as I shake with emotion in front of a God I am not supposed to worship. The power of the experience eclipsed any last hold that the teachings from Sunday school and synagogue against the magnificent and the manifest presence of God may have had on me. I fall in pranam, prostrations, at Swamiji, my guru's feet, my tears unstoppable. If I could just stay there forever at the feet of the man who has done this to my soul. I look back and forth, his face glowing the light of the setting sun, the holy waters of this lake formed of Brahma's mind, the mind of the Creator, the distant towering peak of Mount Kailash, the most sacred of mountains, upon whose peak Lord Shiva resides. Back and forth, Swamiji, the lake, the mountains. It's as though they've merged together into one indivisible, consuming presence of God. I can't meet his eyes. It's too much for me. What will happen if I look into the eye of God? I am too overwhelmed to find out. When all the Range Rovers arrive, we all instinctively fall to pranam at the lake, the mountain, and our leaders who have brought both our bodies and our souls to God, and gather into a semicircle of prayer, with Maharaji, Swamiji, and Bhaishwari in the center, facing the lake, but clearly seeing beyond it. A true yatra, a true pilgrimage, a true journey to God. We forsake sleep, food, warmth, comfort in this quest to truly see, feel, and experience God in His holiest manifestation. What are we willing to endure? 10-hour rides over dirt mountains and through rivers in which our Range Rovers get stuck, nights without sleeping or sleeping gear, days without food. Although I say endure, it isn't endurance. Endurance implies a struggle, a battle, a conquest. This is a stillness in the mind, a peace in the heart, and a joy in the soul untouched by struggle or endurance. It's more like separate realities coexisting. One in which we're cold, hungry, exhausted, and feverish, and another in which we simply are. We just sit, walk, and pray in God's land. Sometimes, on occasion, the first world penetrates the second, but only momentarily. Then we complain or whine. But just like a wave that seems too big for a split second and then becomes soft white water on the beach, these momentary waves leave no lasting impact on the peacefulness and joy of existence. It is a true yatra. We are stripped to the core of ourselves and left bare for God. a land with no beginning and no end, the mountains flowing each other religiously, or following each other religiously. This part of my journal describes our trek around Mount Kailash. A day that has lasted close to 14 hours. 14 straight hours of trekking under Shiva's protecting glance, clothes that come off and go on as the weather randomly and radically changes, from scorching summer heat to bone-chilling winter winds. Then a trek up to 22,000 feet, the highest pass, following 2 other high passes today. We go a few feet, stop, drink water. We offer each other food no one wants. We sit in silence. Words define the experience and take too much valuable oxygen. The rain comes, pouring down on us, first in drips, then in sheets. Then, as quickly as it came, it disappears, leaving a sky filled with dark clouds, each lined by the ever-present sun streaming between them. The clouds become lighter, wispier, and mistier as we sit on the top of the world, peering through the bright mist that envelops the mountains as well as the sky. It seems we are truly sitting in heaven. We sit in Shiva's abode, looking down to a ground that cannot be seen, looking up to his mountain. He offers us momentary glances, then covers himself again in the curtain of clouds, although the peak of his abode is only visible at times of special grace. His presence is felt continuously. I believe that's the end of her journaling. We still have some pages left to go on our pilgrimage through our longest chapter yet. I had been wanting a new name since a few months after my arrival in India. There was nothing wrong, of course, with my old name, and taking a new name never occurred to me before coming to India. But once I had the inner transformation, it seemed to require a new name. I wasn't the same person who had arrived in India. I needed a new name to mark the new experience. A woman living at Paramarth nicknamed me Radha, after the sincerest, closest devotee of Lord Krishna. Other devotees named me Priya, the sweet, loved one. I was temporarily named Shakti, divine power, a name I chose because it was one of the only Sanskrit words I knew that was related to women, and because the idea of being the embodiment of power, sometimes gentle and sometimes fierce, appealed to me. That's not a name, Pujya Swamiji told me. No one is named Shakti. You can be Shanti, which is peace. But I didn't want to be peace. I wanted to be power. So depending on who I was speaking to, I was either Radha or Priya or Shakti. The first time I met Swami Guru Sharananandji Maharaj was in fall of 1996 on the pilgrimage through the sacred area of Vraj. The evening after we had completed the 13-mile walk around Govardhan Hill, I bowed in pranam at his feet as he walked out of the room. Pranam, Bhagavati, he said as he walked by with his hand outstretched in blessing. I had no idea what Bhagavati meant, but in that moment it was the most beautiful word I'd ever heard. I filed that moment away in a corner of my mind and heart. Now, as our caravan of Range Rovers parked on the ridge overlooking Lake Mansarovar, I told my Guru, Pujya Swamiji, I wanted a new name. Not just a nickname, or a name chosen by random devotees, or a name I had picked because I thought it was cool. I wanted a real name that I could wrap around me as the cloth of my new being. So he spoke with Maharaji and Bhaishri and decided that the three of them would give me the name together. They gave me a few options to choose from, nice names, but none of them felt exactly right. In that moment, the experience with Maharaji opened up in the corner of my mind and heart. Maharaji, I said, when I first met you, you called me Bhagavati. What does that mean? Is that a name? He smiled. Ah, yes, Bhagavati. Puja Wamaji. I forgot the S. Puja Swamiji explained, it means the Divine One. Do you like that name? If you like it, it is perfect. Yes, Maharaji spoke again from a deep meditative state. Yes, Bhagavati. So, with our gaze filled by the lake that sprung from Brahma's mind, with the mountain home of Lord Shiva and Goddess Parvati towering over us in the thin air of the Tibetan plateau, I was given the name Bhagavati. I wore it as a shawl draped around me, a new cloth in which I could be cocooned, wrapped and protected, while my former self liquefied and reformed. For me, it was not just a name, it was an official solidifying of a change that was taking place internally. I was no longer the name of my childhood. My identity was no longer the one given by my mother and Manny. It was the one given here in the home of Lord Shiva by the three saints. I had been through a name change before. At the age of 19, after Manny had paid off the lump sum of half my remaining college tuition expenses, and after I had to sign away any legal right that I might ever have to anything that was his, Frank legally adopted me. Although Frank has been my dad since nearly the day he and my mom had started dating when I was 7, there is something very important about ritual. As I stood in the courthouse in Los Angeles, dressed up for the special occasion, Frank and I each signed the legal adoption certificate. Yes, I accepted and welcomed this man as my father. Yes, he accepted and welcomed me as his daughter. I took his last name legally as quickly as I could, eager to erase any vestige of identification with Manny. When Jim and I married, I did not take his last name. I just changed my last name a few years ago, I said. I wasn't ready to change it again. So, I already knew the power of a name change to affect, solidify, and legitimize a change in identity. When I became Frank's daughter instead of Manny's, I began the journey from an identity as one who was abused and abandoned to an identity as one who was chosen and embraced. The change to Bhagavati was another shift, from an identity given by my mother, named after a character in her favorite novel, to a woman, a divine woman, who was the embodiment of the Mother Goddess. I opened the door of the white Range Rover, an unlikely venue for the exclusive and special name-giving ceremony, and, careful not to turn my back on the saints, I stepped out onto the hard ground. I walked into my new name eagerly, knowing it formed the identity into which I would grow. On the final day of our pilgrimage, our vehicles descended into greenery as we re-entered Nepal. The sweet green vines reached out towards us from the mountains along the road. Suddenly, a hot shower sounded heavenly. Other than soaking in the mineral springs at Chiogompa, the monastery above Lake Mansarovar, I had not bathed in almost 2 weeks. Pujya Swamiji's daily sprinkling of water over my head with purificatory Vedic mantras served for me to remain pure, but I certainly wasn't clean. We arrived back at the hotel mid-afternoon and had a special arati scheduled that evening. The Bhagmati river flows through Kathmandu, right outside the famous Pashupatinath temple. Pujya Swamiji had decided we would start the Ganga Arati on the Bhagmati river. Ever since Pujya Swamiji had left his family to meditate in the forests in his early childhood, nature has been his mother. When he came to Rishikesh at the age of 17, after nearly a decade of silence and intense spiritual practice in the forests, jungles, and Himalayan mountains, the river Ganga became his mother. He has worked since the early 1970s to keep the banks of the holy river clean. When basic advocacy campaigns didn't work as well as he had hoped, he turned the rocky shores of Ganga into a beautiful marble ghat, or platform, and instituted daily worship ceremonies on the ghat. He knew that no one would boop in the morning where they pray in the evening, so he began the evening Ganga Arati at Paramarth-Niketan as a way to rekindle people's reverence for the river and transform her banks from being a toilet and trash can to being a temple. In the decades since, as Ganga's pollution has become even more dire, he has started the Ganga Arati in Varanasi, Allahabad, Kanpur, Badrinath, Rudraprayag, Gangotri, and many other places. When the group went for darshan at the Pashupatinath temple in Kathmandu before traveling to Mount Kailash and Lake Mansarovar, Pujya Swamiji noticed the trash on the banks of the Bhagmati. When we return from Kailash, we will have Bhagmati Ganga Arati here and inspire people to keep her banks clean and green, he said. I wasn't with him at the time though. As a white person, I wasn't permitted to enter the Pashupatinath temple. The temple rules say they only permit Hindus, but after an entertaining debate with the guard, it became clear that the rule is only people with brown skin. No one checks religion. No one checks passports to determine place of birth. No one checks race. Are you Indian, Pakistani, Sri Lankan, Brazilian, Latino, or Puerto Rican? No one cares as long as your skin is brown. After placing me in the midst of a large group of Indians, or I added a word, placing me in the midst of a large group of Indians, they worked together to slip me into the country, but not into the temple. Her! The guard shouted as the amoebic mass of our group pushed through the gate, hiding me from view, my head covered with a scarf and eyes to the ground. Her! She is not allowed! The guard bellowed. I wondered what training they'd undergone to learn to smell white skin. The guard's position was ridiculous. We grilled him with questions that began, well, what about? But he never wavered. The absolute absence of logic in his position did not disturb him. So I meditated in the gardens outside the compound while the others went in for darshan. The arati was going to take place on the steps across the Bhagmati river from the temple complex, so I would be permitted to attend that at least. After a long shower, I sat in the hotel lobby with Pujya Swamiji and Dorje, the Tibetan tour guide. Pujya Swamiji had been struck by the lack of proper facilities along the 5-day pilgrimage route, and especially at Lake Mansarovar and Mount Kailash, where so many pilgrims flock each year. As we'd entered the area of Mansarovar on the 3rd or 4th day of our pilgrimage, we encountered a group from England who were on their way out. They recognized Pujya Swamiji and, descending from their vehicles, fell at his feet to receive blessings for successfully completing the pilgrimage. Their exuberance was tempered, though, as they told of the pilgrims who had returned early due to altitude sickness. especially one they feared may have passed away before she got back to Kathmandu. So, from that point on, Pujya Swamiji spent much of the rest of the trip meeting with local leaders, trying to ascertain who owned this land, who was in charge of it, who would we have to apply to for permission to build something here. Swamiji, forget it, everyone said. This is China. There's no way they'll give you permission to do anything on their land. It's a waste of time. But Swamiji follows a different inner guidance than common sense. It didn't matter that the task was unlikely to succeed. It had to succeed. Properly insulated rest houses needed to be built, and there had to be a medical clinic for those who fall ill. It needed to be done, and therefore he would do it. So, prior to the Bhagmati Arti, we sat with the tour guide discussing how to proceed. Dorje had obtained the names and addresses of the Chinese officials responsible for the Ngari Prefecture of the Tibet Autonomous Region of the Republic of China. Our letter-writing campaign to them began a few weeks later and culminated with the construction of 3 ashram/rest houses. One on the banks of Lake Mansarovar, one at Dirapuk along the Mount Kailash Parikrama route, and one in Paryang, the land of the children with bindis. Where they had never seen running water, we constructed an ashram with hot showers by boring wells into the ground and provided a generator for electricity. The former Prime Minister of India, Shri Atal Bihari Vajpayee, summed up the achievement by saying, "Jo Bharat Sarkar nahi kar bhai, ek sadhut ne kiya." What the Indian government could not do, a sadhu has accomplished, which means monk. That evening, after sitting with Dorje to plan our campaign to petition the Chinese government for land to construct a rest house, we left for the Bhagmati Arti. The saints and other yatris headed back to the temple for darshan and would walk across the river for Arti. I, still being white and uninterested in another round with the temple guard, took a different route. I rode in a taxi to the edge of the Bhagmati, and the driver pointed upriver toward the temple on the opposite bank. 50 meter you walk, he said. I walked up the edge of the river as the sun began to dip behind the Shikara, the highest dome of the mandir, towering regally above the rooftops of neighboring homes and shops. Across the narrow river, cremations were underway. In Hindu tradition, cremations are performed on the banks of sacred rivers and the ashes duly immersed into the waters, a practice believed to bestow liberation on the soul of the departed, freeing it from the cycle of birth and death. Raised cement platforms dotted the river's edge, and on each a body lay, engulfed in flames. A few family members and friends sat on the benches behind the burning huts. The rest stood near the body. The flames rose high, carried on the afternoon wind, filling the air with a stench from which my heart and my nose both withdrew. I had never been to a cremation, and I'd never smelled the last moments of someone's existence. As I walked upriver, the smoke followed me, wrapping itself in my hair, across my face, and into my eyes. I could hear the sounds of the jubilant pre-Arti songs coming from the steps ahead. What must it be like, I wondered, to watch fire consume the last bit of your mother, father, child, or spouse, to know, to see that they will not, cannot come back into their body, to have to stand calmly as flames rip into the hands that held you, tear through the lap you sat in, and what must it be like to hear people rejoicing while she on whom your identity was based, he who was the container for your love, is rendered into nothing but smoke and ash. The mourners must be livid, I thought, as we sang the arti and waved oil lamps in from some damp stone steps along the banks of the narrow Bhagmati river, incensed at the audacity of us celebrating, dancing joyously. When a loved one dies, even the sun seems rude for rising. The world should stop, as our world has. It must be so hard for them, I thought, to be grieving while others are celebrating. As I looked up at the smoke rising above the river, I realized that I would be irate because I live in a world where mourning and celebration are seen as inherently separate and distinct from one another, where there are places for mourning and places for celebrating, times for mourning and times for celebrating. Life and death are packaged nicely and neatly into boxes, each tied with a different ribbon. Indians and Nepali don't live like that. Life and death are in the same box, and the bow tie life to death, and the bows tie, my goodness, and the bows tie life to death, and death to life. Mourning and celebration are sunset and sunrise, each following the other religiously. The flames of cremation seem separate from the flames of arti, only on the lowest level. The moment the flames rise in the air, the wisps of smoke merge one into the other, death embracing life and life embracing death. No, our arti wouldn't upset them, just as the cremations across the river wouldn't bother the Indians performing arti here. The jubilant dancers could dance as the flames of death consume a body, for they danced knowing fully that someday the burning body would be theirs. By the time our arti finished and we walked down the steps to the banks of the river to perform the achamana, the drinking of holy water, the pyre directly across from us had mostly burned down, the crackling logs reminding me of bonfires at summer camp, the flames of the pyre subsiding. The family sat on the steps leading into the water, near where their loved ones continued to burn. Suddenly, the tender of the fire, the one in charge of keeping it hot and evenly spread so the body would fully burn, took his wide hoe-like tool and started to push the red logs and unburned bones into the river. They sizzled as they made contact with the cool water. From one side, then the other, the fire tender pushed the remains of the fire into the river. The logs crackled one by one as they splashed and were carried quickly downstream, along with any remains of the loved one. Family members turned their heads to watch the current as the now extinguished logs bobbed on top of the water and the ash spread out into the current's wake. They sprinkled their heads with drops from the holy river while the fire tender threw bucket after bucket of cold water onto the hut, washing away any last bits of bone, ash, and wood. The platform was still burning hot. The fire had raged for hours. As water was splashed on it, steam rose thickly into the night air. Wafts of grey smoke overlapped the blackness of the evening. Only death cast a shadow on the night. The family turned from the river and left, their loved one dissolved into a steam rising off a cement platform, dissipating into the darkness. As we walked back down the river to the taxis, another body was being carried to the hut. The next body, and the one after that, were lined up around the corner, fastened with rope to wooden platforms, awaiting their turn. The families of the ones to be burned after them were still dancing and singing on the steps, knowing not which number they would be. This intermingling of life and death, the palpable impermanence of our existence seamlessly woven into day-to-day life, the ability to dance and celebrate while knowing that someday it will be your body burning on the pyre, the undeniable presence of a truth from which we cannot escape, nor did they even feel an urge to escape, was so different from the way I'd been raised and had always felt about death. The impact of this night has continued to ripple through my awareness since then. Wow. Just wow. What a chapter that has been. Or as you say in Sanskrit, Vahi. That means wow in Sanskrit. Vahi. What a yatra, what a pilgrimage through Tibet, through the sacred river from Lord Brahma, the creator's mind, Mansarovar, meeting Tibetan children, being with saints, giving her new name at the foot of the abode of Shiva, Mount Kailash, all the way to returning with her guru, inspired to make a difference practically, to build ashrams and places for running water to flow, all the way to the celebration of life and death of the Bhagmati river. I am sure that this is a pilgrimage our author will never forget, and one that I hopefully will never forget too. And may these impressions sink in deep within you also. That is the longest chapter in our book. Every chapter we read next will be shorter. Om Namah Shivaya. Thank you for listening.